Welcome back to Psychoanalysis course, Story of Psychoanalysis, Episode 1, Part 2. So far, we have taken in-depth view of how psychoanalysis and Freud coexisted in each other and gifted a world of beautiful phenomena of better understanding of human mind. Using the same psychoanalytic language, if we see that psychoanalysis has an ironic destiny like the return of the repressed, there is always a return of psychoanalysis, as Sir you mentioned. Can we go into it, how it has been?
Because psychoanalysis has found something true and it is deep and at the root of pathology many times, no matter how hard you try to get away from it, someday you have to come back to the fundamentals of psychoanalysis. And they need not be the fundamentals of all the schools of psychoanalysis. All the schools of psychoanalysis have something time-tested and eternal in them. And because it is deep to understand and even more difficult to practice, it is not everyone's cup of tea. Unlike other schools of psychotherapy, which you can learn in a year or two, this takes quite a long time, and this is more like a cult. Now, that being the situation, there is a periodic return to it. On one hand, you have eternal findings there. On the other hand, it's very difficult to understand, so it cannot be on a mass scale. And easier and more popular alternatives will always be higher in terms of the market share. So this cycle goes on. Last person to say back to psychoanalysis or back to Freud, we had two important personalities. One was Kohut, who silently said back to Freud without saying it aloud. And of course, he developed his own school, but there was no denying of Freud's fundamentals. The second has to do with Lacan. Lacan made this term popular, back to Freud. Unfortunately, Lacan himself was a crackpot and on a trip of his own, and therefore he took a turn quite radically different and fell into that difficult component of trying to repackage everything. But if we leave him apart, the back to Freud in Lacan and Kohut are always there. And this keeps happening every 20, 30 years, this back to psychoanalysis, back to Freud movement. Why it has not happened recently is the closedness of psychoanalysis, that we have not been able to incorporate the movements which are popular and have come up afresh in the last 10, 20 years. So it's our refusal to incorporate developments in the area of psychotherapy that has led to stagnation of psychoanalysis. Return out of the repressed also happens in terms of the packages which are coming in. For example, the very popular package of healing the inner child, very popular package of shadow work, very popular package of psychodrama, a very popular package of say ISTDP. So these have come up using the insights of psychoanalysis, but psychoanalysis could not incorporate them or develop itself in an open way. So the return to psychoanalysis is there, but the return is usually a return of a tourist. It is not really the return of a pilgrim. And that brings us to the point that if the return happens and we see something eternal in psychoanalysis, why are we not able to put it at the center in terms of technique. And that is where the technique deficiency and the tool deficiency comes in, especially the tool deficiency. That psychoanalysis is an extremely tool deficient area. It has abhorred actually this whole idea of tools and leave apart the do-it-yourself tools, even the tools for the therapist, except for the frame. So except for the frame and the interpretation, we have been a tool allergic discipline, and that is at the root of the return of the repressed happening every 2 decades, but not sustaining long enough to be at the center.
So, how is this contemporary state of psychoanalysis?
It's a state of stagnation. And this brings us to what we had discussed before, that if we look at all the schools of psychoanalysis, there are schools which only have process orientation. Say, for example, Winnicott, Kohut, or Klein. They only find out a few phenomena and work on those phenomena. They don't get into the model of the mind. So there are process-based schools. Then there are schools which have a model of the mind, and only 2 people stand out, 3 people actually, Freud, Jung, and recently Lacan, who have created a model of the mind. And then you have schools where you have a, let us say, a meta-psychology. So Freud has a meta-psychology. Other schools, they don't even have a meta-psychology. And then you have a philosophy. That can you anchor that into a philosophy? And no school in psychoanalysis has got into philosophy. This creates a problem that you stagnate and you become isolated and you're closed. So the state of psychoanalysis is such that we have many good developments, many good concepts and theories and techniques, but we are closed. And the second problem is the problem of the genius, that we don't actually have successors of Freud and Jung. So there is a genius problem. So this also is a problem of stagnation, that we never produced Freud and Jung after them, because it takes a very high level of capability to really go into model of the mind. So the genius problem and the closeness problem, they have what has stagnated psychoanalysis. Otherwise, it's a very rich area of concepts and techniques if you could just fertilize it with areas outside. Say, for example, you bring in psychedelics into psychoanalysis. You bring in ISTDP techniques into psychoanalysis. You bring in the CBT techniques into psychoanalysis, and you create a richer psychoanalysis. It would become a very potent form of healing. Unfortunately, we don't have that caliber of people who have the intellectual capability and the courage to make it happen.
Is there a future for psychoanalysis in that case? How will it evolve, if I may add to it?
I'm not only hopeful and confident, I feel certain that psychoanalysis has a bright future. And as I said, the bright future will be when we first we try to bring together schools of psychoanalysis, step 1. Step 2, we try to bring in other schools of Western psychotherapy. And step 3, when we are able to bring in Eastern schools of spirituality. And when you do that with psychoanalysis as the anchor, you create a really holistic framework in which psychoanalysis in that future holistic framework will have the most important position. It will be like the anchor into which everything else is fitted in terms of the process. And in terms of the structure, it's more likely to be the Hindu psychology structure of Tantra or Sri Aurobindo, where that provides the holistic structural format, and psychoanalysis combined with West and East provides the holistic functional component of that system. So this is how it's likely to evolve, and I see very bright scope for that happening, not in distant future, but very soon. Next 25 years, I think we should be having that integration.
You have developed a system called HEAT. How does psychoanalysis incorporate itself in the system?
HEAT is holistic elemental analysis and therapy. It's a system of psychotherapy which has a process part, a structure part, a model of the mind part, a metapsychology part, and a philosophy part. So that system takes Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, with which actually is something added to the tantric model of the mind, and to that structural part we bring in the process knowledge of psychoanalysis and other psychotherapy schools, and part of the structural knowledge also of the personal unconscious, collective unconscious, personal unconscious, the conscious. And to it we add a few concepts, new original concepts, and to that we add a philosophy, and that creates the whole HEAT system, where functionally speaking it is anchored in psychoanalysis as the most important component, but to it is added the karmic component, the general causality model, the chakra system, the flow of life energy, and a holistic healing framework, as well as the philosophical concept of reincarnation. And the tools, they include all the holistic healing tools of using idol therapy, using mantra, using psychedelics, the entire system. So what I said needs to be done, I have tried to do it in developing the HEAT system, where functionally speaking, in terms of the process analytics, the most important component of the system is psychoanalysis.
Is there a possibility of artificial intelligence doing psychoanalysis better than a therapist? Because there are a lot many apps which have come up who are trying to replace the therapist. It's not just the human touch we are talking about.
Generic principle is this: what can be standardized can be manualized, what can be manualized can be automated. This is the generic principle.
Absolutely.
Anything that can be standardized can be manualized, can be automated. And what is automated, you can do it, automate it better using artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence essentially is an extension of automation applied to what used to be low-end human mind activities as of now. Now, can it replace a therapist? If you're talking of a therapy which is standardized and manualized, the replacement is possible. If not today, maybe tomorrow. It may take different forms, like you may be interacting with a machine like a human being. So it's not necessarily a screen. You may be interacting with a robot, but essentially it is still AI replacing a human being, using the display monitor of a robot or a display monitor of a talking picture or hologram or whatever. Now the question is, can it be done to psychoanalysis? And this brings into question how psychoanalysis happens. So if you're talking about a standardized system, maybe cognitive therapy, maybe certain forms of behavioral therapy, maybe certain parts of CBT, you can possibly do by artificial intelligence. And some people say that artificial intelligence does better therapy if you get into machine learning, where it can improvise itself. So the more it does therapy and the more data it has and more it can machine learn, the better therapist it becomes. And if you put it together with processing power and huge amounts of data, probably it can have experience of 100 therapists in a few hours. So that is one part of the thing. difference comes in here. Psychoanalysis happens in a unique way, which is what makes it difficult, almost impossible for artificial intelligence to do it. The reasons are this. The blank screen is not a static screen. There is processing happening in the blank screen. The blank screen is in process. The therapist is in discourse with the patient at an unconscious level. So the therapist is not just giving cognitive outputs. The therapist actually is processing things. So, for example, a patient comes and for quite some time, he is digressing in various directions. And you allow it to happen and then suddenly it comes to something very important. Now, if you were to program it, you would probably cut short the digression as a waste of time and have the machine give some input to bring the person back to track. But that would defeat the purpose, because where you can bring in convergence to the classical process, that will bring up material less rich than what comes up after digression. So this kind of a human part is not possible for the machine to do. That is one part. Second part is in terms of the cultural metaphors. That is very difficult to build into machines, especially contemporary cultural metaphors. You can still have a dictionary of the past cultural metaphors, but the evolving cultural metaphors are difficult to build in. The third important component is part of therapy happens verbally, but an equally important part, which is difficult to understand and do, happens non-verbally. And that can happen only to a human system. It cannot happen to a machine. For example, the whole phenomena of transference, counter-transference, projective identification and containment, holding and containment. And if I can add a special type of containment leading to the ineffable O, if I call it attainment, a special kind of containment. Now these things are non-verbal. So they cannot be standardized because it happens only at the moment and in a non-verbal way. So if you have an artificial intelligence robot, the phenomena of transference and counter-transference, projective identification, containment of various types, starting from holding to just containment, to a positive containment, to a containment leading to the ineffable O. All of this cannot happen. So this non-verbal part of therapy, which is a very important part of therapy and the most difficult and one of the richest parts of therapy, that cannot happen. And the whole idea of feeling safe with a person that a patient develops, which is so necessary for him in his own healing journey, is very difficult to develop with a machine. That you always feel safe with the machine which is programmed, but your problem is feeling safe with human beings.
Absolutely.
And that comes only by being with human beings. So these are the factors where it's difficult, virtually nearly impossible for artificial intelligence to really take over a psychoanalytic psychotherapist. Because of, as I said, the non-verbal part of therapy, the contemporary metaphoric discourse, and the whole idea of being with a blank screen and projecting and developing a safety with the live human being, especially through transparencies. So that is where it becomes difficult. So we don't have to worry about artificial intelligence.
The first take is done. Coming conversations will be on Sigmund Freud. See you all there. Namaste.
Namaste.